And now price and all of that, while important, okay, on some level becomes far less important. Because we've gone beyond the surface level to the emotional reason for what they want. And people will buy for emotional reasons far more than they will for logical reasons. If you're just going with logic, then I might say, well, you know what, I want to, oh geez, you don't accept insurance, so I'm not going to do it. Mm-hmm. If you tap into my emotions and you can show me how I can get the real deep thing that I want, that becomes far less of an issue. Far less of an issue. Like really far less of an issue.
Hello, and welcome to the Cash-Based Practice Podcast, a production of drjarodcarter.com, aimed at giving physical therapists and other healthcare practice owners the information needed for success in the private pay business model. And now, here's your host, Jarod Carter.
Unexpected life lessons from a Rubik's Cube. I haven't done this in years and I'm nervous. My kids now have robotic legs. I haven't felt this way since I was 15 years old and on a plane to Australia. I was driving into a hurricane yesterday and then this happened. Those were all subject lines that I recently have sent to my clinic email list, whether it's past clients or people who became leads and never converted. They are all now getting a weekly email from me, and it has been magic for my practice. I knew going into the fall, after all that's happened in 2020, that I had to do everything I could to stay in front of my past clients and leads regularly and in a way that was truly engaging, that they were my lowest hanging fruit, that yes, I do want to generate new leads and new business and new patients, of course. But if I'm not focusing on reactivating past clients whenever they need me, or my clients, or my PT services, then I would be leaving a ton of money on the table. And that approach of a weekly story-based, entertaining, valuable email primarily comes from today's podcast guest. I have been following Dave Dee for a few years now, and I'll just make this statement here. I've been on his email list for over 2 years, and he emails me every freaking day. I mean, think about that. To stay on an email list from someone that emails you every day, those have got to be damn good emails, and they are. They're entertaining, and I always get something out of them. I always learn something for my businesses, but in a very entertaining, unique way. And so that's why I stay on his list, and that's why I've bought his courses. I bought multiple of his courses as well. So it works. It's worked on me. And so I was just so excited to finally, I felt kind of like I was having a fanboy moment. But finally got him on the podcast after learning from him for all these years. And I really honestly feel like this is, if not the most valuable, one of the most valuable episodes of the entire podcast. Years I've been doing this. I've had a lot of amazing guests, obviously. But the strategies and immediately actionable items that you're going to get from this episode, they're just so impactful. And the results that they're going to get for anyone that really listens to this, takes notes and implements, it's going to be phenomenal. So I'm just really, really excited about this. So just briefly, we first focus on the email marketing strategies that I just kind of described. And then the second half, we get into the initial phone call or the initial consultation. And there are these actionable scripted things that you can immediately use to increase conversions of phone calls and consults into cash pay customers, even if they don't know that you're out of network with their insurance. It's so good, actually, that I use a part of it in an e-course that we're launching this week. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about in a moment. But first, I do want to mention 2 resources that Dave has for us. So one is called the Virtual Selling Machine. It's a completely free, report, ebook style report. I downloaded mine the other day, and it's, as everything he does is awesome. And so it's a totally free report. There's no reason not to download this thing. The subtitle is 4 Easy Steps to Close More Sales, Make More Money, and Help More Clients, even if you can't meet in person. And you can check that out. I have an affiliate link with him, drjarodcarter.com/DEE. So his last name is D, so it's DE. So it's drjarodcarter.com/DEE-selling, SELLING, if you want to get that free report. And then the email marketing course that I took from him this summer, it was an online course, obviously, that is available for all of you guys. And I mean, kind of like what I've been doing. I mean, I think he really prices things in a way that he wants this information to get out there. And especially in these days when, it's a lot of businesses are hurting, he's made it incredibly affordable for what you get out of it. I mean, it's paid 10 times and generated return clients for my emails that I've, from these strategies I learned in that course. It's paid for itself, many times over already for me. So you can check out the details of that email marketing course at drjarodcarter.com/DMail. So DEEMAIL. Okay. So before we dive into this episode, one more big announcement. And as I make this announcement, I want you to kind of tune into the emotions that you get when I paint this scenario in your head. Okay. So the phone rings and you pick up the phone, or your receptionist, if that's who answers the phone for your practice. And the caller says, "Hi, just wondering if you guys take Blue Cross." And you don't take Blue Cross, by the way. They ask about something that you're not in network with. You're cash pay or out of network with that particular one. And the first thing they do is ask that question. How does that make you feel? When you get that kind of call, are you comfortable with that? Are you excited about it? If you're anything less than excited, like I am these days, when someone asks that question in that initial prospective phone call, then I guarantee you there is incredible room for improvement in how you handle that initial phone call or how your receptionist does, and you are losing a ton of money until you get there, until you make that improvement, until you learn the skills and the strategies and the mini scripts that you can use to guide a person whose first question is about insurance to 10, 15, 20 minutes later being excited to choose your out-of-network services. It is an art, and it is a learned skill, and it doesn't always have to be so freaking uncomfortable. I was in that boat too when I first started my cash practice over 10 years ago. Freaked me out when that was the first thing someone asked. And through the years, all these years of teaching this stuff and coaching my mastermind, this is one of the biggest, most vital things to get right, and it's one of the most sought after pieces of information or sets of information and systems and strategies. Anytime I post something about the "do you take my insurance" question, it gets the most interaction, the most likes, the most questions, and it's asked all the time. It's asked all the time in my mastermind group. And so for that reason, over the years, I've taken the things that I've done with training them, training my staff, learning myself, all the sales psychology, everything, and I packaged it in to an e-course, a kind of a masterclass series. It's a 5-lesson series. It's actually not crazy long to consume. I think it's maybe 2 or 3 hours of overall content with some really, really valuable related bonuses, as well as a bonus module that's part of today's episode with Dave Dee. And altogether, it's going to give you the things that I've learned and, many of my students have learned through the last 10 years of how to master that initial patient phone call. So it's called, quite literally, How to Answer the "Do You Take My Insurance" question. Kind of a long title, but it's what people ask all the time. And again, if you didn't feel totally excited and comfortable as I painted that scenario for you, please, this is worth a look. As with my other recent courses, I have made it extremely affordable. I want this information out there. I don't want you guys having to have any more of an uphill battle in an out-of-network practice as we enter a recession and continue to deal with the pandemic. So check it out at drjarodcarter.com/the question, the-question. I think whether you put the dash in there or not, you'll get there. So the question, THE question. Will take you to that new masterclass series on this incredibly, incredibly vital topic. You can be a marketing genius. You can have the phone ringing off the hook, but if you can't answer that question and handle it, skillfully guide that initial conversation, you are losing a ton of clients and money and opportunity to help people. So please check it out, drjarodcarter.com / the question. Okay. Sorry for the extremely long intro. I appreciate you bearing with me on all that. There are 3, great resources I just mentioned to check out. Please go, find those, download what you can for free, check out what's possible. I really think that, everything in this episode and everything I've mentioned so far in this intro is absolutely key to success, especially in a cash-based or out-of-network practice. And so please do consume everything you can. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. And here is Dave Dee.
Dave, this is so exciting for me. Thank you so much for being on the show. I've been a fan and a student for a long time, as we'll get into here in a bit. And just thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me, man. I mean, I'm super excited to talk to your folks and to really help them give out some stuff practical things that they can use to put more money in their pocket.
Absolutely. Great. Well, why don't you fill us in on your background and what got you into sales and marketing?
Yeah, it's interesting. The reason I laugh is it's probably different than everybody else who's watching this or listening to this right now. So Jarod, since we have limited time, I know I'm not going to start. We won't tell my entire story. We'll just actually start when I was 8 years old. Okay. And then we'll move. Then we'll go from there. But honestly, it all did start when I was 8 years old. When I was 8 years old, my grandmother, for my birthday, gave me a little magic set. And as most 8-year-old boys over that age group, they get a magic set, they play around with it. But I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the art of magic. And I knew really since I was 8 years old that that's what I wanted to be. That's when I grew up, was to be a professional magician. Now, my parents thought that was kind of cute when I was 8 years old. But when I was 18, they didn't think it was as cute anymore. Right? And so I got a lot of negative programming, such as, you won't be able, it's like most entrepreneurs, right? My business was really, the business I wanted to go into was a service business, just like your folks. Yeah. I mean, honestly. And so I got a lot of negative programming. You won't be able to do that. You should work for a company, get a real job, all of that stuff. And I believed all of that. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people have negative programming even to this day regarding their business that's holding them back. And we can talk about that a little bit today. So I took a very traditional route. I went to University of Massachusetts. I graduated. I got a job at a radio station. I was on air, and I also wrote some some commercials for folks. But then I discovered that the people that were making all of the money were the people who were in the sales department. Mm. And so I asked to be in the sales department. They had no training program. My training program consisted of literally the sales manager slapping me on the back and saying, "Go out there and get him, killer." Right? And that's also true for most folks who we're talking to here. They don't teach you that in school. They don't teach you that's an important element to your business. And so I really didn't like that job. I was terrible at it. And I left there. I moved to Atlanta to work at a, quote, executive magic store. Pitching magic tricks. Now, we didn't sell these were in beautiful hotels. They were in the Marriott Marquis downtown Atlanta, the Hilton in downtown Atlanta, and we didn't sell magic tricks to magicians. We sold overpriced magic tricks to unsuspecting conventioneers. So my job was to stand there in this beautiful store set up like Houdini's library and draw a crowd in, do a planned presentation where I would demonstrate magic with a script, and then close. If people wanted to buy the tricks and learn how they worked, that's how we made our money. And that was my first really where it was like learning a planned presentation and learning how to present in front of a group of people. Well, but I still had this passion to be a professional magician, and my heart really wasn't into this, even though I became the number one salesperson in the company. But so that job ended, and I had a decision to make. Was I really going to live out my dream, or was I going to just get a regular job, right? And to me, having a regular job and working for someone else, because I had done it now right out of college, I mean, that felt like death. The only problem was I didn't know how to book shows. I was only doing about 3 shows a month, and most of those came from my association with the magic store that I was working in.
Mm.
And I thought, and this is the very first important lesson, I thought that if I just got really good at my craft, if I became a really good entertainer, I would be successful. And that's what almost we're all taught. Everyone in the industries, for the folks that we're talking to, right? The physical therapists, the doctors, everyone who's listening to this, that's basically the message that we get. Just get really good at what you do and you'll be successful. Well, the problem was that wasn't working, and I was falling further and further into debt. And then I decided I needed some motivation. And so I went to a big success rally motivational seminar at the Omni in downtown Atlanta. And they had a ton of celebrity speakers. And in between the celebrity speakers, there was guys pitching you on their products, right? And the last guy in the program, Norman Schwarzkopf, was the keynote speaker. This shows you how long ago this was. Wow. And everyone's leaving. This guy comes out, guy I never heard of before, guy by the name of Dan Kennedy, never heard of him before. And I'm getting up to leave, and he says, you might as well sit down because, you're just going to get caught in Atlanta traffic. And so I sat down, I started taking notes. Now, I'm so dumb that I don't realize that this guy is trying to sell me something, right? I think he's actually trying to teach me something. So I'm trying to take notes, and he's going too fast. And then he tells what the price of the program is that he's selling at the end. And my heart sinks because I knew that I needed the program. I knew that this was the key, that marketing was the key to this, but I didn't think I could afford it. But I went ahead and I remember something that Jim Rohn said. And for the folks who don't know who Jim Rohn is, Jim Rohn was Tony Robbins' mentor. Jim Rohn said successful people invest in themselves and their education. And so I said, well, I want to be successful. I better do what successful people do. So I invested in the program and then in other programs as well. Most importantly, I implemented. I took my focus from being mastering my craft to becoming a master marketer. And this is a big mindset shift. And if the folks can really get this, this will change. It changed everything for me. I'll give you the results in just a second because they're amazing. So I changed my mindset from, hey, I am a magician to I'm a marketer of entertainment services. That mindset, it may seem small, but Jarod, it was a big deal because it put my focus where it should be, which was on the marketing. And so bottom line is I started marketing and most of it wasn't good. I did a lot of stuff that didn't work, but I did a lot of stuff, right? That was my focus. And I went from doing 3 shows a month to averaging 25 shows a month in less than 90 days. In my 4th month, I did 57 shows. And so I like everybody to just translate those numbers to the business that you're in, right? Because again, I had a service business. So often when I speak for our audiences, I tell them my story. That an objection that I know is in people's mind is, well, yeah, but I'm not an entertainer, right? I'm a chiropractor. I'm an MD. I'm a physical therapist. I'm a butcher, baker, candlestick maker. But here's what I needed to do. I need to generate leads, right? I need to close those leads. I closed via consultation, right? So for me, it was over the telephone. Sometimes actually it was in person for corporate. I had to then perform the service to get paid. I then wanted referrals and repeat business, just like any other business on the planet, right? My business just happened to be entertainment. And so what happened was I started getting invited to speak on stages in front of entrepreneurs to tell my story. And then other smart business owners who said, well, it doesn't matter what he's selling. He's selling a service. I'm selling a service or a product. Marketing is marketing is marketing. They started asking me to help them. And what happened was I realized that I could make a greater impact on people's lives if I got into that role of helping people who I love and appreciate, because I'm one of them, entrepreneurs grow their businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so very slowly, my business shifted from being an entertainer to doing what I do now,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we're talking about. But what's really cool is when I go out and speak. In fact, I just did a virtual event 2 weeks ago where I was the MC, a speaker, and I also did a virtual mind reading show.
Okay.
So I still get to do my show. I still get to perform, but I just don't get paid for that piece of it anymore. So that's a synopsis of why we're talking.
Yeah. And I know that in the intro that I record after this, I'll give people more context of how I came across, your stuff and have become a student of yours. So we'll kind of skip that, but as a bit of a story, and as you like to use stories and what you do, I recently took your email marketing course, and I started to implement it. At the time of this recording, it's only been maybe a month. And I've not worked up to daily emails by any means, but I just, with everything going on with multiple businesses in life, I said, I'm going to commit to one email a week. I actually need to write that email after this so I get this week's in.
I need to write mine too,
yeah,
just
exactly.
so you know.
Yeah. So, but I started to do these emails that were not, the typical ones that I'd done monthly before that, your standard email newsletter with lots of pictures and links to all this stuff, but just text only for the most part, story-based, and started to incorporate, as you teach, the things that are going on in daily life, the stuff with my kids, an experience that I had with a local business owner or whatever. And the response has been amazing. I even, as I mentioned, I launched a new business this week, and I teased that business, just barely mentioned it in last week's email. And I immediately got a response of, tell me more about that, because I think I have a lot of people to send your way. But all of them, it's so fun, actually. Now that I'm getting into it, it's so fun to think about how can I take a normal daily event or an interaction of some sort, and then turn it and weave it into some sort of lead to some sort of call to action for my services as a physical therapist. And I mean, sometimes the call to action is not necessarily, it's not like a strong call to action. I mean, a good example of one of the emails that I got a great response to was, I put in an order on Favor. It had been a long 3 days, a bunch of stuff with my kids and business, and I was just exhausted. And I was really excited about these short rib tacos from this place. Well, Favor screwed up the order, never called it in. And I call right at 8:00 when I didn't know they were closing their kitchen, but the owner answers, and I was like, do you have an order from Favor, about to come out? He's like, man, we did not get that order. He said, what's your address? I'm going to make this right. And I was like, excuse me, what's your address? He said, wait a minute, actually, what's your order? Because the kitchen's closing right now. I want them to get this done. So he puts in my order, gets my address. 30 minutes later, the owner of the restaurant is at my doorstep, dropping off. And he brought us this cool hat and some other swag and some extra of my favorite salsa. And so I put that story into an email for the next week, told the story. And I just, basically my closing was, I've always strived to make Carter Physiotherapy wow its customers the way that Eldorado, the guy from Eldorado, wowed me. If there's anything that I can do to help make that happen in your life this week, just hit reply and let me know. I got like 7 replies. 2 of them were people that said, I just ordered food from that place because of that story. It was so awesome. And now I'm getting feedback of loving these weekly emails. It's like I'm connecting with them on a personal level now. It's just been awesome. So I want to thank you for bringing that. I've been reading your emails for 2 years, so I know what you've been doing, but to be able to sit in that course and learn it and actually go through the structure of how you have people do it, it's really been game changing.
It's thank you. First of all, thanks for implementing it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Because it works if you implement it. And it's shocking how many professional services providers aren't doing this. So by the way, I think once a week is fine. I don't think you need to get up to daily. I think once a week for your business is excellent. But this is like the lowest hanging fruit on the planet. I mean, this is, if people just started doing a weekly email, or I call it a D-mail. Yeah, very corny. But if they just started doing that the way we're talking about it, which is not I'm the doctor or I'm, corporate like, but personal, friendly, story based. At the end of the year, you're going to have more referrals, more repeat business, more loyal customer patients than you can imagine. And it literally, how long does it take you to write an email now?
Sometimes it's just 10 minutes. Sometimes it's 20 or more, depending.
But really, around that time.
It's not bad. Yeah.
It's really a marketing sin and a selling sin for a practitioner not to do this. I mean, it really is. And your open rates will increase, and you're really building a relationship with those folks on your list, to leads, to unconverted patients, as well as to your own patients.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not hard to do.
Yeah.
It's not hard. I mean, there's a little art to it. There's a little science to it, but sending out that weekly personal email with personal stories is a game changer.
So if we could, so that, listeners could potentially start to implement this right away, what are the kind of the top level things that you will suggest someone who's like, okay, I want to do it. Where do I start? They maybe have never written emails in this way before, or even like monthly newsletter emails that never get opened unless you're in retail somehow. My wife opens all her retail newsletter stuff, but I've never gotten the best response from those in my practice. So how does one get started in this? What are the kind of key takeaways and kind of steps to go through?
Sure. So the very first thing is to make sure that you are collecting email addresses. All right. So I mean, honestly, you got to be collecting email for every phone call that comes into your office. For every patient, you've got to be collecting these emails to be able to do this. So that's the first step. The most important thing to know, and we'll go over some actual structure, but let's go over the overall concept first. The overall concept is that you want to make your emails entertaining as well as informational. And the best way to do that is to personalize them, to make them, and I don't mean personalized like, hi, Bob. I'm talking about making them personal email. Just, Jarod, as you were talking about, talk about things that are going on in your life. And people will often say, well, my patients aren't going to want to read that. Well, I don't know. Have you heard of this thing called the Facebook, Jarod? Have you heard of the Facebook?
Just once or twice.
Facebook, that's all it is, right? It's all personal stuff. And so when you write in this way, when you tell a story, just like you did, so I'll often tell stories about things that I've done with my wife, or or I've gone out when my kids were smaller, when we would go out on a date together, I would talk about that. And now, of course, there's got to be a payoff for the reader, right? So it just can't be, hey, this, we went to the beach like you did. You told this very engaging story and then tied it in at the end with a simple message. The biggest mistake that people make when writing emails is that they write about whatever their topic is. So by that, I mean, so a physical therapist would say, okay, here are 9 exercises that you can do to eliminate your back pain. I'm just making this up, but you get what I'm saying. And then they get into the nitty gritty detail of all of that. And I used to do the same type of thing. The emails that I used to send before I really learned how to write them properly were packed with content. These emails were so good that you could almost sell these as a course, really. But I noticed that I wasn't getting a lot of response from them. And when I switched over to making it what I call infotainment, right? Infotaining, right? Then what happened was my open rates went up. My response went way up, and my sales went way up because people were actually reading them and looking forward to reading those emails. And so the big switch I made was delivering this much of a story or of an intro to my email and this much content to this much story and this much content.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that is what, and then you will get response. And by the way, if you do this for a while and you stop writing the email, what will happen is you'll get your patients and prospects will be emailing you, hey, I didn't get my email, because they look forward to receiving it. So you want to think about, okay, here is the point that I want to make. Right. So this is typically where I start. Here's the point that I want to make. So I know I want to make this point. And now the reason I want to make this point is that I want this action to happen. I want my prospect or the person, the subscriber, to take this particular action. So what's the point that I need to make in order for the prospect to take the action that I want them to take? So as the late Stephen Covey said, we begin with the end in mind, right? What is the purpose of this? So if the purpose of them is to get them to click on a link to go to a sales page to buy my email course, right? That's what I know, that's what the outcome is going to be. Then I think about, okay, now what can I write about that's going to lead naturally to that conclusion? Now, I wish I could tell you that there was a systematic approach to doing this, and there really isn't. Sometimes, on the other hand, I'll just come up with a subject line, and we'll talk about subject lines in a minute because they're really important. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I'll just come up with a weird subject line, and I'll just start right now. I always know what I want the prospect to do. I always start with that. So I always start with, right, the person who's reading this email, here's what I want them to do, right? So I know that right before I start writing the email. But oftentimes I'll just start writing, come up with a subject line, start writing, and then honestly, if you just do it, you'll see how it works. It flows. You'll just naturally make the connection. Oh, here's how I tie that in. Just like exactly what you did, which was perfection, what you did with that email about the restaurant. That is absolute perfection. Now, you could be dry and you could talk about how we at what's the name of your
Carter Physiotherapy?
Yeah, Carter Physiotherapy. We strive to provide superior patient experience. Come on, right?
Right.
But not as good as telling that story. Right? Not as entertaining. We live in an entertainment society. People want to be entertained, and so that's the key. So your subject line is really super important. All right, so you've got to spend time on that. I personally like curiosity subject lines. So a subject line that they've got to open the email in order to figure out what it is. So what was your subject line on your email?
On that one was, I was so looking forward to those short rib tacos.
Perfect. Right? Yeah. Perfect. That's great, right? Because you're like, why is this?
Yeah. What?
Right? Well, I've got to read that, right? Because it's right. And by the way, there's no other physical therapist that's sending out an email like that.
Right.
None. Right? They're sending out the one that I just kind of mocked. Right? And again, that's got to get open. So one of the ones that I sent recently was a police end up saving sex doll. That was one of the.
I remember that one. Yeah.
Right, do you remember that one?
Yeah.
Right. That got a huge open rate. So the curiosity-based subject line is a really, really powerful one. The bizarre subject line, like that's a kind of a bizarre subject line as well. Sometimes a single word subject line or just the prospect's name. So I'm going to teach a technique here that they can take and use immediately. Right. It's not mine, so I'm going to give credit where credit is due, and they can look it up to see exactly how it works. But if you do what I'm about to ask you to do, right, do it today. Literally, you can do it today. Yeah. You will get calls and appointments today. Seriously, right?
Let's do it.
So it's called.
I'll use it in my email right after this.
Yeah, it's it's called. The marketer who came up with it. It's not mine. All right. It's Dean Jackson's 9-word email. So just look up Dean Jackson 9-word email. Send it out. It's literally 9 words, including the subject line.
Wow.
And I guarantee you, you try it. I guarantee
okay.
you will get business from it. All right.
Okay. I can't wait. Yeah.
Basically, you're sending it out to unconverted leads.
Okay.
It's basically the prospect's name and are you still interested in buying a new home? Are you still interested in relieving your back pain? Are you still interested in, just look it up. I mean, it's very, very simple, but don't change the word. Don't add anything to it. Just send that email out and you'll see the power of email. All right. So, but then in addition to that, so you should have that one at least once a quarter as part of your email marketing plan. And then you should be sending for you guys, a weekly email. An email once a week, personal story based, that comes to a point of a call to action. There should always be a call to action, and it doesn't have to be a hard sell call to action, just exactly like you did, right? Maybe you could share that email with folks because it sounded brilliant. It sounded just perfect.
Thanks.
And if you do that so that's 52 emails, you send them every week. You will have an increase in business, period, over and out, and your cost, other than the 10 to 20 minutes that it takes to write this thing, is, let me calculate it, 0.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the lowest hanging fruit on the planet.
Right. And we've been, kind of preaching that a lot this year of, in times of, what we've been dealing with, the pandemic and, economically, you cannot afford to not capitalize on your lowest hanging fruit. That which is easiest to reach, and reactivating past patients is huge. And that's why in my mind, I was like, all right, we need to be digital and we need to be, not missing any opportunities with low hanging fruit, which is past clients. So that's why I started doing this. And I was like, I gotta stay in front of people and make sure that they come see us if they're in need.
You just said that was just a gold bomb that you dropped on everybody. So the beauty of this little methodology about sending this one email a week is that exactly what Jarod, you just said, is that when the patient is ready, you're going to be the practitioner who they go to, period, because you're the one that's in front of them. We can't often control when our prospect is going to call us. Now, there's certain things that we can do to create desire and things like that. But the truth is, really, until the person is ready, they're not going to we want to be there. We want to have what's called top of mind consciousness. So when they say, oh man, I've got to go to a chiropractor, a physical therapist, an MD, a dentist, whatever it is, I'm going to Dr. Jarod. Right? There's not going to be any question. The other thing that it does for you, and it's kind of a hidden thing, is that it builds up your referral business. Because now, even if a person says, "Oh my God, my shoulder is like really," friends talking to a friend, and one of the friends is on your list, right? The person says, "Oh, my shoulder is killing," right? And they say, "Oh, you should go see." Person says, "I need a physical therapist." Well, the person who's on your list is going to say, "I got the person."
Yeah,
I know who it is, right? And so again, it's so simple, it's so easy to do. It will bring in profits and bring in patients. Not doing it, as I said, is really negligence.
Right. Absolutely. So let's maybe shift into the next topic that I wanted to make sure to cover with you when it comes to, obviously that's mostly a marketing, staying in front of them, getting them to do something, but let's take it to when they actually are on the phone with you or in person with you or staff, the sales process. Yeah. This is a big one in our niche and the people that are listening, in that, we either have practices or are interested in having practices where people, not in all cases, but most of the time are, spending more out of pocket for our services than if they were going in network with their insurance. And so that consultation, the sales process, I think, becomes ever more important, that they're skilled in that area. And just like you said before, it's not like we learn this stuff in grad school or in medical school. It's something that you've got to work at for a long time. And I know you have a lot of very quick to implement tactics that you can share, and I'd love to hear. And you work with a lot of healthcare providers and practice owners. So in that world of, and I'm sure it applies to all, but if you can think about the healthcare providers that you've really helped ramp up their business by teaching them sales tactics, what stands out to you as kind of the things that you see being done wrong, and then how to fix those?
Sure. So let's do that, but let me go through a complete system, like
Sure.
really the four-step process for what I call consultations that close. And then if people want more detail, we've got a report that they can get more detail on it, and it's free. But let's talk about the big elephant in the room, is that most healthcare practitioners don't like selling. Right. That's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them think that selling is somehow beneath them in some way. Like, I'm a doctor, I shouldn't have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Or even if they don't feel it's beneath them, they feel it's kind of, sales is kind of unsavory.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the reason for that is that they truly don't understand what selling is. So let's break through this misconception about what selling is. So number one, a lot of people think that selling is about manipulation. And what I like to tell people is the difference between manipulation and persuasion is intent. Is your intent. So if you've got a prospect in front of you, a potential patient in front of you who needs your services, who you can help, right? Who has come to you, and you're going to deliver a superior care to them, then it's, in my opinion, you have a moral obligation to do everything you can within ethical bounds to close the sale. That's what professional selling is. Professional selling is about helping people solve the problem that they really want to have solved, help them get the outcome that they want to have. That's what it is. It's not about manipulating them or getting people to buy something that's not going to help them, that they don't want, that they don't need, that's not going to serve them. The late, great Zig Ziglar had a wonderful saying which encapsulates what selling is. He said that you can get everything in life that you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. That's what selling is. So we've got to get out of our mind the used car salesman, that's a salesperson. Or we've got to get, or really, honestly, the problem is a lot of the sales training that's out there, that's online, is totally obnoxious. You see the guy on the phone browbeating the prospect, hard closing. It's not what we're talking about. You're a professional. You want to maintain your level of professionalism, but you still need to close. Because as I just said, if you don't close, if you don't follow a process, the process that we're going to share with you here, then what happens is you're doing everyone a disservice. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're doing your practice a disservice. You're doing your employees a disservice. You're doing your family a disservice. And most of all, you're doing your potential patient a disservice, right? Because you haven't mastered the single most important skill. The final thing before we get into the thing, the actual how you actually close, is this. And man, if you get this, it's really exciting. Every time you increase your closing percentage, you give yourself an instant pay raise. So if you go, and you can double, like literally double. So right now, let's say you're getting 2 out of 10. That would be terrible. Let's say you're getting 2 out of 10, though, just for illustrative purposes, of people who you meet with 10 people, you close 2 of them. Well, if you can double that, go from 2 to 4, you've just doubled your income, right? Because there's no other costs involved. The cost of generating the lead is already there, right? There's no additional cost. That money goes directly to the bottom line. So that's why this is so exciting. So think about that. And you can literally double or triple the amount of the amount of your closing percentage. And that's the easiest way to, because it doesn't cost you anything. You're not spending any more on marketing. Same amount of people are coming in. You're talking to the same amount of people, but now you're closing them. And Jarod, as you said, with everything that's going on in the world today, man, we have to maximize each one of those opportunities. Mm-hmm. We can't let prospects come in and not close them, especially the ones who we can help. Mm-hmm. So I know I went off on a little rant there.
No, that's great. That's great.
I think it's super important. Okay, so let's go over the structure.
Yes,
and interrupt me anytime, I get excited about this stuff because I know what this can do for the folks listening. Mm-hmm. So there's 4 stages to the sales process. Now there's things you want to do beforehand, but let's just assume that we're in front of the prospect, we're on Zoom with the prospect, we're on the telephone with the prospect. Here are the 4 phases. And I'll lay out the 4 phases, and then I'll describe what happens in each one of the phases. The first phase, so everyone should be writing this down, because I want this to be, any podcast I'm on, I want it to be the most valuable one. All right?
Very good.
So first phase is the meet. So write down meet. Then you have discover. Then you have prescribe. And then you have close. So now in traditional sales training, everyone focuses on what? They focus on the close, 101 closes. The close is just a natural part of this entire process. And in fact, if you do the beginning steps right, the patient will often just say to you, how do we get started?
Yeah.
That's what will happen, right? So you don't need 101 closes or anything like that if you follow this process. So the first phase is the meet phase. Here's what needs to happen during the meet phase. The most important thing is that you need to develop rapport with your prospect. Because check this out, studies have shown that 80% of all sales are based on the prospect liking and trusting you. Not based upon, get this now, this is really important for what you teach, Jarod, not based upon price,
right?
Based upon the connection that they have with the practitioner or the salesperson. Mm-hmm. So we need to develop rapport with our prospect. It is the number one thing that we need to do. Because if we have a rapport with them, if they like us and trust us, right, we are going to close more sales automatically. Automatically, you're going to close more sales. So the question is, how do you develop rapport with someone, and how do you do it quickly? Because you can't have a long, drawn-out process. Now, obviously, we don't have time to go into this in super great depth, but let me give everyone a strategy that they can take and that they can use immediately. I'm like today, like right after you hear this on your next consultation with a prospective patient, use this, all right? So there's something that comes from a science called neuro-linguistic programming, and it's called matching and mirroring, right? So when people are naturally in rapport with each other, they match and mirror. They match each other's physiology. They match each other's breathing. They match each other's vocal. And you can see this. It happens naturally. So you just go out and you look around, you see people together. You can tell just by looking at them who's in rapport, who's not in rapport, mm-hmm. right? They're sitting the same way. They've got the same look on their face. Just the other night, my wife and I are watching some Netflix thing, and I noticed that my shoulders sore, right? And I'm like, then I noticed that my arm's in like this really weird position. And I look over at my wife, Karen, and she's got her arm in the exact same weird position. So what happens is when people are naturally in rapport, it is a subconscious thing that they're matching and mirroring each other, okay? But what we found is that we can do the same thing consciously, and the prospect will feel a connection with us. Now, there's many different things to match and mirror, but let me give you just one, because you can use it whether it's Zoom, phone, or in person, and that's to match and mirror someone's voice. how they use their voice. And under voice, there's many things, but let me give you just one. I'll give you two so you can match and mirror today. So if your prospect, the first thing you can match and mirror is their pace. So if your prospect speaks quickly, then you're going to speed up your voice. If they speak more slowly, you're going to slow down your voice. And this is very powerful because remember, people who are like each other tend to like each other. People who are not like each other tend not to like each other. So if you take, let's say there's a great salesperson from up north. I mean, this person's a killer, right? They just close like crazy. And you transplant that, let's say it's a New Yorker, down to the deep South. And they're talking like New Yorkers talk, and they're talking fast, and they're talking sharp, and they're talking to a Southerner, right? Well, there's going to be a real mismatch there. And the Southerner is going to think, hey, that's one of those slick talking salespeople, right? Now let's take it in reverse. You take a salesperson from the deep South who is a killer, right? Closes sales like crazy, and you transplant that person up north, and they're talking to a New York prospect, and they're talking slow, right? The New Yorker's like, come on, right? Let's get going here, right? And so again, matching, mirroring the pace at which they speak. Now, I'm originally from up north. I still talk fast, but not as fast as I used to talk, but I've got to be careful of that. So match and mirroring the person's voice. The other thing is their volume, right? So if the person is a softer talker, you lower your voice as well. If they talk louder, you talk louder as well, right? So now you're matching and mirroring their pace and the volume of their voice. Now, the beauty of this is that the prospect is completely unaware of this going on. Unlike traditional sales techniques, where people are pretty sophisticated these days. They know a technique, and a tactic known is a tactic blown, right? So we need to use subliminal techniques, like I just taught you. If you do that, what will happen is the prospect, and then there's other things you can match and mirror, but again, you can start doing this today. What will happen is they'll just feel a connection to you, like, hey, this person is like me. But the number one way to develop rapport out of everything, and I've got a bazillion techniques for developing rapport, but the number one technique is to be fully present with your prospect. Really be listening to them. Not with, again, to quote Stephen Covey, not with the intent to reply, but with the intent to understand. People don't feel like just look at the news. People don't feel like they're being heard today on either side, right? And that's how your prospect feels. A prospect, especially with what's going on today, doesn't feel heard. And so if they meet somebody who is really, truly listening to them and being present with them, that's going to develop rapport faster and trust faster than any technique. But the only way to do that is to follow a plan, is to have a planned presentation, not a canned presentation. A canned presentation indicates you're going to say the same things to everybody. No, a planned presentation. Because when you have a planned presentation and you're not winging it, you can be present with your prospect because you're not thinking about what's the next thing that I need to do. What's the next thing that I'm going to say, right? So most people, when they're talking with a prospect, they're in their heads, because they're worrying about what they're going to say, right? So in the meet phase, you develop rapport. Most important thing, though, is do the matching and mirroring, because that helps, but to be truly present. Any questions on that, or did that make sense?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to move into the discovery phase. And the first two phases are honestly the most important. Everyone jumps to the prescribe phase at this point. Okay, so you want to spend more time in the discovery phase, because especially if you've been doing your business and you're an expert at it, you may instantly know what the solution is, but the prospect still wants to talk. right? They still, right? And so I've got to be careful. I'm notorious like this. So I love teaching this stuff because it reminds me of what I need to do.
Right.
So just so everybody knows, I sell high ticket stuff over the phone or via Zoom, anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000 in a single Zoom session. So what I do is like, oh, I got the answer because I've been doing this for so many years. And I'll just like interrupt the prospect to show how brilliant I am. Terrible, right? So here's what you want to do in the discovery phase. You want to find out what the prospect really wants, but you want to find it out on an emotional level. So I'm going to give you some questions. And so most people only go to the surface level, right? We want to go deeper than surface. So what the question that you want to ask is, so Mr. or Ms. Prospect, what, or a variation of this question, what's most important to you about blank? So Mr. Prospect, what's most important to you other than getting out of pain? Let's just use it as an example. What's most important to you about getting full range of motion back in your shoulder, right? So obviously we know that they want to get out of pain, right? That's no shit, right? So, right. But so other than that, what's most important to you?
Could I say something like, instead of full range of motion, because that's kind of like clinical speak, could I say more like, what's most important to you about fixing your shoulder? Just the overarching idea of just fixing this problem. Okay.
It's funny. That's such a great point, is to not use internal language. It's just that I work with so many practitioners, right? And I'm using the language that you guys use, right? Right.
Mirroring us.
That's funny. That's great. He's so spot on with that. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And then you listen, and you're looking for an emotional reason, and you want to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper until you get that emotional reason, the real reason that they want this result, that they want to get this result. So the person might say, well, so because I love playing tennis and I can't play tennis, right? Okay. So you really want to get rid of the pain and fix it up so you can play tennis again. What do you love about tennis? Oh, my wife and I, that's what we do on our dates. We used to go out every Saturday, and I'm feeling that disconnect. Bang. Now you've got, right? This is huge, everybody. This is huge, because now once you know that, once you know the real reason, the deeper reason, every therapist, every doctor is going on the surface. The surface. And if you're just going on the surface, then you often will become a commodity. And if you're a commodity, what happens is your prospect bases their decision upon price or upon what insurance will pay, right? And that's the complete opposite of what you want. So we need to develop rapport so they like us and trust us and know that we're the person that can help them. That's the most important. But now, if we now know what they truly desire, when we move into the prescription phase of the process, we go back to showing them now by following this protocol, by following this treatment plan, whatever it is, how they are going to be able to now go and play tennis and reconnect with their wife like they did. I'm using a pretty extreme example, but to make a point.
Yeah.
But now everything's relating back to the thing that they just told you that they truly wanted, the transformation that they're looking for. So I get excited about this stuff, as you can tell.
I have to say, I love the statement that you used, and I'm excited to use it now. I've got a couple of lead calls this afternoon, actually. But we, for a long time, have been asking about, what beyond the pain is it that you're looking to solve, and getting at that. But I really like this statement. I want to repeat it for the listeners, is to say, well, what do you love about that? Because I can think about, like yesterday, I was on the phone with someone who can't run, and she's just a really big runner. And I hadn't really in the past used that idea or that statement of, well, what do you like? Why do you love? I'm not saying like, why do you like doing that, but just what do you love about it? And getting them to emote a bit about, yeah, well, it just keeps me sane, or maybe it's just I like the way my body looks when I run enough, or whatever. But what do you love about it? I really like that statement. I'm going to be using that for sure.
Yeah, and then listen to what they say. Then listen to what they say, and you feed it back to them. So really, honestly, the real reason that you want to, I don't know what the person's issue was, their hips or their legs or whatever it was. The real issue you want to solve is so you can get out there and start running again, because that's really your meditation, right? Or whatever they said, right? And the person says, yeah, that's exactly it. And by the way, no one has dug that deep ever, ever for them. Oftentimes their spouse has not even dug that deep. Now, so think about what you've done here. You've brought up, first of all, they like you, they trust you. Now you've dug deep into their core, seriously, into what they truly desire. And they've just opened up to you and told you what they truly desire. So they have that emotion of what they truly want. And because you're the person that's sitting there intently listening to them and asking the question, they link that emotion to you. Okay? And then when you get into the prescription phase where you describe the treatment plan, you've got to remember, you go back to that. You go back to that. You go back to what they just told you that they truly desire. And now price and all of that, while important, okay, on some level becomes far less important.
Yeah.
Because we've gone beyond the surface level to the emotional reason for what they want. And people will buy for emotional reasons far more than they will for logical reasons. If you're just going with logic, then I might say, well, you know what, I want to, oh, geez, you don't accept insurance, so I'm not going to do it. If you've tapped into my emotions and you can show me how I can get the real deep thing that I want, that becomes far less of an issue, far less of an issue, like really far less of an issue.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, the most important part of the prescription phase is to keep going back to the thing that they told you that they want. Okay. That's most important. Then the close, and we'll talk a little bit about objections if we have time. If we don't, that's maybe you can have me on again. We can go deeper. But the close can be very simple at this point. If you do everything right, oftentimes after you've presented price and you've done all of that, the person, if you've done everything that we just talked about, will say, "How do we get started?" So most of the closes that I use, I'm not actually even closing, because everything leads to the prospect saying, how do I get started? How do we, what's our next step? Right?
Can I ask a quick question there on that? So you just mentioned the price. So is the prescription, do you typically find that you're discussing price in that prescription phase? This is what it's going to look like. This is what it's going to cost. Or do you wait to try and get them to say, yes, let's get started, and then talk about price?
No, the prescription is where I do everything, where I lay out the plan, okay? And I tell them what, I call it the offer, okay? But yeah, and I tell them what the price is and everything like that. And then typically what the person, again, what they'll say, if you've done, now we've gone through these, there's, just so everybody understands, there's more to it than what we're talking about here, but this gives you kind of a great overview. Typically your prospect will say, well, what's our next step? And then you do what's called the paperwork close, where you take out whatever paperwork or whatever you have, whatever your next step in the process is, and you just assume the sale. The other close, and this is a real tricky one, so people are going to want to write this one down. This is, because you might not be able to remember, this is kind of scientific, is I will often say, so what do you think? That's it. Okay. Now, every sales trainer on the planet would say you can't use that, and they would be right if you follow a traditional sales path, right? If you're trying to do traditional selling and using these canned closes and things like that. But if you follow this process and you do everything in the process, again, the prospect will say, well, what's the next step? How do we get started? Now, the prospect may say at this point, they may have some objections. And do we have time to talk about objections, or are we going on?
I was going to say, if we could specifically address, given the context of this podcast, if we could go into the objection of, let's say you're in the prescription phase and they don't yet know that you're out of network, that you're not going to be billing their insurance. And so price your, for us, it's $185 for an hour session. That comes up in the fact that we're not billing insurance. Let's say that even if we've done everything right up to that point, there's an objection to that. How do we address those objections?
Sure. So let me give you the framework for answering objections, because it's the same framework regardless of what the objection is.
Okay, great.
So the first thing that you want to do is you want to align yourself with the prospect. So again, in traditional sales training, and again, this is what's being still taught today, like by these hardcore, like I'm a macho, testosterone-filled closer, right? Please don't do any of that unless you want to lose patients and never get referrals. Is like the prospect has an objection, and you've got this pithy thing that you've memorized and that you just crush their objection, right? And they just melt, right? And they just go ahead and buy. Well, that's not how it works in the real world, right? Especially with what we're selling here. So the first thing is to align yourself with your prospect, and you want to write this down, everybody. You want to use one of these three phrases: I agree, I understand, or I appreciate. I agree, I understand, or I appreciate. This is called the alignment phase, okay? And so what you're doing, most prospects, so let's say the prospect says, give me an objection and we'll just run it through it. Just like you've done the price and you've told no insurance, what would an objection be?
Oh, well, I was actually really, hoping to use insurance for this. I have good insurance, so I was hoping I could use it for my shoulder.
I understand. Using insurance is something that you were hoping you could use. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So once again, I've aligned myself with the prospect. Okay. I said I understand or I agree. Person says, well, that's more, let's say that's not an objection. Let's say they say it's expensive. Right? Wow, that's expensive. I understand how you feel. It is expensive. All right. So notice how I'm aligning. I understand, I agree, I can appreciate, whichever one is true. So you don't want to say I agree if you don't agree. We want to maintain integrity, but you can always appreciate what the prospect is saying, all right, or understand what they're saying. So the first phase is you align. So I call it the difference between, I use a martial arts analogy. So you've got karate, which is you're attacking, you're punching, your opponent's coming in, you're using force against force. There's another martial art called Aikido, where you're taking the person's energy, there's very little striking, and you're redirecting their energy. Okay? We want to become Aikido salespeople. We want to get a black belt in Aikido selling. So by aligning, first of all, you maintain rapport with the prospect, because the prospect is expecting there to be an argument. They don't want an argument, but they're expecting it. You totally disarm them when you say, I understand, or I agree, or I can appreciate that. And then the key word is the word and, not the word but. If you say the word but after you say I agree or whatever, and you say the word but, you have just literally negated everything that you said before it, and you've just told the prospect that they're stupid or that they're wrong, right? So, Jarod, I know you probably never had this because you're such a good-looking dude, right? But when I was dating, right, so, you ask a woman, hey, you want to go out to dinner? And you get this reply, oh, Dave, you're a really nice guy and everything like that, but, right, what's not happening, right? Exactly. Right. So you want to use the word and. All right. Now there's different ways to answer it. And let me give you an example. And what most of so then what you want to do is you want to isolate. So you've aligned, now you want to isolate. Other than the fact that you want to use insurance, which I can completely understand, is there anything else that would prevent you from going ahead and getting started today? Or some language like it. So we want to isolate the objection, because oftentimes the first objection that they give us isn't the actual objection. So what we don't want to be doing is having this back and forth, like prospect has an objection, you answer it. Prospect comes up with another objection, you answer it. Prospect comes up with another objection, you answer it. So we want to try to isolate it. Now, it doesn't always work, right? Oftentimes they'll have multiple objections, but you want to find out. Now, if the prospect says, well, really, I'm not 100% sure. I've never really heard of you before. Or my brother's sister's hairdresser knows a physical therapist. And right, you want to find out what the real objection is. Mm-hmm. But let's assume that the real objection in this case is insurance. So you've aligned. You say, other than insurance, is there any reason that you wouldn't go ahead? I mean, you do think that this treatment plan that I laid out will help you get back on the court, get back to running, so then you bring it back to the thing that they desire. And then what you can say, there's different techniques, but here's a simple one, and it's very easy to remember. It's called feel, felt, found. Feel, felt, found.
Found, okay.
Okay? So I understand how you feel. Many of my happiest patients felt the same way. In fact, many of my happiest patients said the exact same thing that you just said, that they wanted to use insurance. And here's what they found, that it was far more important to get the highest level of care so they could get out of pain and back to running, just like you want to get back to running. So you can have that Zen feeling, or whatever the prospect has said. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yes, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Right? And so again, it's, I agree, I understand, I can appreciate. Is there anything else holding you back? Well, many of my happiest patients felt the same way, and here's what they found. Now, what would be ultra awesome is if you had testimonials that you could show, mm-hmm. right, from patients that said, and by the way, you all should, especially if you have a cash-based practice. I know for a fact that people have come up with this objection before. Go back to them and get that testimonial that said, you know what, I was really concerned that I wasn't using insurance, but I'm so glad that I went with Dr. Jones, because he did exactly what he said he was going to do. And that was worth more than the little bit of money I would have saved on insurance, right? By using insurance.
Can I ask two quick questions?
Yeah, of course.
For that second part, that's brilliant now, because those are my favorite testimonials that preemptively address those objections. And I have them on my homepage and about page to talk about, like, literally said, I know they didn't take insurance, so I was a little hesitant. Best decision ever, in all caps. I was like, wow, this is like my golden nugget testimonial. So on that topic, would you say they don't happen to close in that moment, would you follow up by sending them an image of that on Google, or how would you kind of present that testimonial?
Well, I would show it to them right there. So I would have that prepared. And okay. I probably would have it so you didn't have to go to your website. I'd probably literally have it, or you could have it on your iPad and show it to them. So I would probably show it to them right there. But then we're talking about the next thing is, okay, you're not going to close everybody. That's no matter what strategy you're using, we're not closing everybody, right? And you're never going to close everybody, but you're going to close a lot more sales by following the structure. But then the second piece to this, which we really don't have time to talk about, but that's the follow-up afterwards. So it's called presentation, no sale. And again, this is where most doctors, most physical therapists, dentists, I know dentists are doctors, by the way. I meant MDs and dentists and so on and so forth. This is where they fall short, because they don't have a sequence that goes out after they've done a presentation. What most of them think is that, well, the person came in, I just did my best, case presentation to them. They didn't buy, therefore they're not going to buy. Huge mistake. Tons of money left. You need an automated sequence that goes out afterwards to follow up with the person that did not engage with you right there. For sure. But that's a whole other topic. So yes,
part two.
That's really part two. Because really what we're looking for here is you want a complete sales system. One of the things that you said, I don't want to let it go because it's really important. So if somebody goes to your website and they read your testimonials, they know that you're a cash practice. So the best way to overcome, by the way, that objection is to preempt that objection. Right? And we could do it. Let's do another one where we could talk about, right now we're talking about the person sitting in front of us. How do we close that sale?
There was one thing on the feel, felt, found I wanted to ask. When you kind of presented that as if you were speaking to a prospect, I think you said something like, does that make sense? Is that something that you use that phrase a lot at the end? They found, and then they found that, spending more out of pocket up front for the highest level of care, got them back to doing the things they love.
Just like you want to.
Just like you want to.
Then whatever their whatever their emotional reason is, right? We got to we want to tie that back in. Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it?
So then you say that makes sense, doesn't it? Kind of just like you want to get back to running. That makes sense, doesn't it? Okay.
That makes sense, doesn't it?
And then I'm guessing you kind of pause and let them respond.
Or you can use, that's more important than the little bit of amount of money that you might save out of pocket for insurance. Don't you agree? So those are called, in selling, those are called tag on, tie downs. So you have, isn't it, wasn't it, that makes sense, doesn't it, isn't she? So you're asking, and you want, those are called like little minor closes. This is making sense. Is this making, or this is making sense, isn't it? Right. You're understanding what I'm talking about, aren't you? Right now, the problem is, again, a tactic known as a tactic blown. And if you listen to salespeople that have been trained by traditional salespeople, they use it way too much, right? And then it becomes obvious, or they use it in a blatantly manipulative way. So I work with a lot of financial advisors and insurance folks. And so a question that they would ask, or that they're taught to say is, well, the security of your family is important to you, isn't it? Well, no kidding. Right? That comes out as so blatantly manipulative, right? So there's two problems with it. One, it's terrible. Number two, it's not a question. Even though it in grammar, in English language, it is a question, you don't put a question mark. So Grammarly would put a question mark after it. You don't. So it's a statement. That makes sense, doesn't it? See the difference between the security of your family is important to you, isn't it? Or the security of your family is important to you, isn't it? Now, let me give you one other thing. Let's take it a step further. So I teach, the name of my full program is called Psychic Sales 2.0 because of my background as a mentalist and magician. But there's subliminal language that you can use. Let me give you two words that you can use. All right. If you use the words naturally or the words obviously before you make a statement that you want your prospect to agree with, they will automatically agree with what you say. So it is one of the, because it's built in. So listen to the difference. We'll just keep going with the financial advisor or insurance salesperson because it's so simple. So listen to the difference. The security, Mr. Prospect, the security of your family is important to you, isn't it? Or naturally, Mr. Prospect, the security of your family is important to you. Right? And so when you use naturally or obviously, before you use those words before a statement that you want your prospect to agree with, they will automatically agree with what you're saying. Naturally, Mrs. Prospect, uh, getting your shoulder fixed as quickly as possible so you can get back out on the tennis court and enjoy that time with your husband is more important than the small amount of money you may save from putting this through insurance. Don't you agree? Now that way, notice I just combined two things. All right. So I said, obviously, I'm telling you, practice this. Notice I'm doing a slight head nod. Mm-hmm. If you develop rapport, they're going to follow you. And I really just basically answered. Everyone should transcribe what I just said, because that's a really great answer to that objection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was brilliant. I and my receptionist, who's answering the phone and kind of getting people set up with calls with me, will be transcribing and re-listening to this and using a lot of these statements. This is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I would love to do a part 2 on the post-sales process to make sure that we're not leaving money on the table, because not everyone's ready to say yes in that moment. But I mean, I've had people that have been on my list that, I'm sure you have this example a ton, that, they've been on the list 6, 12 months before they end up coming in and saying, okay, I'm ready now. And having that follow-up and that automated or even just having them on your list and doing the weekly emails we talked about in the beginning is just huge for capitalizing and maximizing your conversions long-term.
Yeah, I mean, if the folks watching this or listening to this just did those two things, like just kind of incorporated a little bit of what we talked about here today, and then the weekly email, they're going to see an increase. This will be the most valuable podcast that they listen to all year. I mean, honestly, if they just do that, because they'll see results in their bank account. We're talking about measurable results, right? Which is really the only thing I care about. Am I going to see results in my bank account?
Right.
Using stuff.
That is great. So tell us a little bit before we end about the report that y'all put together on the consultations that close, and where can we get that?
Yeah, and so we've got a really great. It's a brand new report. First of all, it's beautiful. I wish I could say I put it together. I mean, the content's fine, but it's just really, really well done. Mm-hmm. And it's all about closing the sale in a virtual environment. So you can use a lot of the strategies, almost all of them, truthfully, in person, but the focus is on in virtual. Mm-hmm. So everything from your camera to your lighting to going through in a lot more depth the 4 stages that we just talked about: the meet, the discover, the prescribe, and the close phase, in a lot more depth than we had time to do here. It's absolutely free. You just go to davedee.com. You give me your email address, we give you the report, and then on top of it, you get a free subscription to my daily D-mail newsletters, which you've been on for
hugely valuable. Over 2 years, I think. So for those, sometimes we have people that'll listen, they'll listen to the podcast and then they'll go back and not re-listen, but listen to all old. So let's say someone's listening to this a few years from now. Is it still likely to be at the homepage, or do you have like a / like a landing page where they can always find that report?
That's a really good thing. I'd have to, maybe we could put that in the show notes.
Yeah, no worries.
Because I think that we do. I just don't know it off the top of my head. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And I got to remember that for future podcasts. Thank you for that. Seriously.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to be recording the intro after, so I can put it in there as well, and the show notes. So we'll make sure that at any point in the future, someone can get that report and really dive deeply into this, because it's such a vital component. I mean, I'd want everyone who's not already convinced to really consider the fact that when you're moving out of network and the game is completely different, the past thing of, well, my doctor told me to go there, so that's where I'm going to go. It's out the window. Not to say that doesn't have an effect on their decision when their doctor says, go see this therapist or whatever the case may be. But you have to build in these kinds of steps of actually spending some time on the phone, and then maybe spending some free time with them in person or virtually, to get them to the point where they have these things that Dave has talked about of, building rapport to the point that they're ready to say yes to something that might cost a little more, or a lot more in some cases than their other alternatives. So please take this stuff, re-listen to this. This is an episode to re-listen to for sure. And Dave, thank you so much.
Hey man, thanks for having me. I had a great time. I really did.
Me too. Me too. Fun. Great. Well, we're going to have to do a part 2 at some point in the future. We'll continue the story of, for those that don't close in the first meeting, how to get them to close down the road.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you again so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cash-Based Practice Podcast. If you liked what you heard here today, we have some extremely important things we want to send you. First, a quick start guide to cash-based physical therapy and Medicare. This free ebook will provide the primary rules and regulations surrounding this confusing but important topic. Secondly, we want to share with you the 5 characteristics common to all successful cash-based practices. Find out the vital things Jarod has learned from years of interviewing cash practice owners and running his own successful cash practice. As one of our listeners, we want to give you all this information absolutely free. You can get it right now by going to drjarodcarter.com/success. Again, that's drjarodcarter.com/success. Go there now to get your copies, and we'll see you next time.